person who waited in line to see a movie or paid at the box office and went at the time I was in my early teens or about 11 or 12 years old and then into my teenage, went with groups of friends to go see certain films. If we saw the logo of Hammer Films, we knew that it was a very special picture. We knew it was a certain kind of film. A surprising experience, usually, and shocking.
Welcome back to the Cinema Shame podcast. My name is James Patrick, your host as always. We have a very special Halloween-themed episode coming to you this month. My guest today is Dan Day, or Cushing Lee on Twitter. Maybe
that's a bit obvious right there.
Maybe you can see where we're going with this time. This episode is going to be devoted to the Hammer horror production. And if you went back a few episodes, maybe you've heard the musical Shamedown with Jessica Pickens. We're going to stick to a similar format here. We wanted to recommend 5 or 6. I think we got to 6, right?
Yeah, I got 6. I still have the list, actually. Yeah, I think it was 6.
So we have 6 Hammer films that Dan has chosen specifically for you. Maybe you've seen them. Maybe you need a refresher. But we think, and I agree here, that these are 6 of the best, we'll say, non-mainline Hammer films.
Yeah.
So outside the Dracula, Frankenstein, and I guess we can probably include the Mummy in there too, since they're all based on the Universal properties in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. So I think. Did you have anything you wanted to add? I talked right over your intro, so if you wanted to give yourself a big walk-in here, that also be fine with me.
Well, I have a movie blog called the Hitless Wonder movie blog. If any baseball fans out there, you can probably figure out that I am a White Sox fan, but been doing the blog for about 5 years or so, and I actually have not only met, but I actually know some of the Hammer ladies. I'm not saying that to brag. It's just that's just the way it came about. So, but I will say this as a disclaimer. I am a huge fan of Hammer films. I have been for a long time, but I'm kind of going off the top of my head. So, if in case I do get a name wrong or a date wrong or anything like that, please don't excoriate me on the internet.
Yes, it just means that he is pulling all this from random access memories, and I had to do hours of preparation in order to just show up at the microphone tonight. So if you get something
just shows
wrong,
you how geeky my life has been. So
true passions aren't geeky. You find something you love, and if we were diddling, maybe. We're not diddlers. See, this is serious business.
Yeah.
Hammer is serious business, and I think you are well aware.
In all honesty, I think Hammer is probably even more popular today than when these movies came out. I mean, Hammer as a brand name is just, anything, any new Blu-ray that comes out of an older Hammer film, anybody that writes a book about Hammer, it automatically gets into the Amazon Top 100. I don't know who exactly owns the rights to the entire company now. It's gone through various hands in the last couple of decades, but whoever it is, they got to be making some money off of this somehow. So,
now, why do you think that Hammer has such longevity? I mean, you hold it up there alongside the Universal horror movies as the two true figureheads of cinematic horror.
Yeah.
Now, why do you think Hammer endures?
It's interesting because my friend Josh Kennedy, he made House of the Gorgon this spring. He's an independent filmmaker, very young man in his 20s. He loves Hammer films. And he was being interviewed by a magazine from Argentina, and they asked him to interview Veronica Carlson and ask her what it was like to be in House of the Gorgon. She's in House of the Gorgon. She was in a number of Hammer films. And Josh told me, he said, well, I don't really want to ask Veronica questions about myself, so he had me do it. So basically, to get to the point, I had to ask Veronica that same question, and her response I thought was rather interesting. She said Hammer is a way to be safely horrified, that they're adult fairy tales. And I think it's a very good point, because when the Hammer films were first released back in the 50s and 60s, of course, totally different time, they were considered, gory and, horrible and
they were
and
certainly
violent.
pushing the boundaries for the decorum in British cinema.
Exactly. But you look at some of those films now, they almost look like episodes of Masterpiece Theater. I mean, it's, and I think that plays into it, but I also think when you see these films in widescreen and, when they come out on Blu-ray or TCM was showing some of the Hammer Frankenstein films the other night, you see them on widescreen and you see them totally remastered and, just the color, the production design. I think that is another reason why they still held up, because these films were very, very low budget. I think people would be amazed at how low budget these films were. Mm-hmm. I think there were probably American TV series that probably spent as much money on their episodes as Hammer did, and these films were made in very, very short time period, like literally a couple weeks. And when you watch them now, they do not look cheap. I mean, it's obvious, it's not $300 million. It's not a Marvel movie, but if you're willing to look at these films, place them in the context of when they were made, I think they still hold up very well.
I think that's something that these new releases have done, is kind of created a renewed interest in Hammer. I know just being on the internet and hearing the conversations about them, that there are, I guess, very devout Hammer fans who will argue over every small aspect ratio, and I know that many of the releases haven't lived up to some of their expectations, but they really do make the films look new again. I first saw them on VHS, and those VHS tapes were gray.
Yeah.
I mean, they're gray, and they're full frame, so you don't get to see all of what's on that set. And the set design in these films is extraordinary. Yes, and the colors that they used, I mean, they had a very definitive feel that I don't think we're really getting
Eastman color.
until
color.
These Blu-rays.
Yeah. No, I'll go back even further than that, which, I first saw most of these films on Svengoolie. Mm-hmm. I'm sure most of the people listening here know who Svengoolie is. If you don't, he's the horror movie host on MeTV. Well, he was the son of Svengoolie out of Chicago. I live in northern Indiana, and I was watching him like way back in the early 1980s.
Calling all stations. Clear the air lanes. Clear all air lanes for the big broadcast.
Hey, mister!
Yes.
What time is it?
Well, it's time for a real classic horror film, Christopher Lee in Horror of Dracula. And I know that you will... a break now. Wait a minute. I thought you folks liked Dracula movies.
Sven, let's face it. Dracula's all right, but he's, well, kinda out of style.
Out of style?
We need to update him. Modernize him. I've got it. It's modern. It's happening. It's coin-operated. Can't you see it? An updated Dracula. He comes out at night thirsting for quarters. He's Dracula.
I was watching these films, obviously they weren't in widescreen, they weren't uncut, and they sometimes look like they went through a washing machine. But the thing about Hammer is there was something in those films, I mean, so many different elements, but there was just something that just piqued my interest and just, captured my imagination, even back then. And, of course, now you see these films, like you said, in widescreen and just looking absolutely gorgeous. They definitely do hold up.
Now, this might be idle curiosity, but do you remember the first one you saw?
Well, unofficially, it would probably be 1 million years BC, because back in the 70s and the 80s, they showed that on the independent stations like all the time. Mm-hmm. So unofficially, it would probably be I think like officially, like the first one I think I remember seeing on Svengoolie, I think was probably Dracula, Prince of Darkness, or Dracula Has Risen from the Grave, because those two Draculas, for some reason, they were constantly shown on TV, and I'm sure a lot of it was, it's Dracula, it's Christopher Lee, So it was probably one of those.
Let's talk a little bit about the history of Hammer horror, because I think it might surprise a few people how this actually got started.
Well, yeah, they were a very small family-run company, and they had made some films in the 1930s. And like I said, I'm not going to, I'm going to try to keep this short, and I know I'm not going to get it like 100% accurate. So for all the people that do know, like the actual personal history of Hammer, this is just like the Cliff Notes version. They made some films in the 1930s. They actually made a film called Phantom Ship with Bela Lugosi. So actually, Bela Lugosi did do a Hammer film. they brought him to England to make a Hammer film, but
the original founder of Hammer Film Productions was a jeweler, correct?
Its producer was Anthony Hinds.
Hammer was my father, surprisingly enough. He was a successful businessman and a failed comedian. He failed because he wasn't really very funny. But he and another chap did a double act years ago, a comic double act. And because my father's business was centered in Hammersmith, they called themselves Hammer and Smith. And the name Hammer started from that. And he went into financing films before the war. I don't know why, because he hated films. Then during the war, a mutual friend introduced him to someone called Enrique Carreras, who was involved in cinema exhibition and distribution. And together they formed a company called Exclusive Films, which just distributed little short films.
And his son was James Carreras, the famous Sir James Carreras, and he basically, was the head of the company. He didn't really have anything to do with the making of the films. He was kind of like he set up the production. His expertise was getting money from American investors to make these films. And it was something that a lot of these low-budget, film companies in the 50s and the 60s did, like American International. They would make a poster, and they'd go around to people and say, hey, we're going to make, this Dracula movie, this Frankenstein movie, and they'd make the posters lurid as possible, and then they'd get the money to help make the film, then they'd make the film. So that's what basically James Carreras was good at. But post-war, and this is like real inside baseball here, but in England, I think there was I don't know the exact name of the law, but I think there was a quota law that to protect the British film industry, theaters couldn't just show American films. You had to show I don't know exactly what it was. I think you had to show at least one British film for every American film you made. So you had a lot of companies that were basically making what they called quota quickies. And that's what Hammer basically did. And they were making adaptations of British radio shows, and they made a very famous adaptation of a British TV serial called Quatermass, the Quatermass Experiment. And that was actually the first real Hammer horror film. It's more of a science fiction movie.
Maggie, look!
Nothing can destroy it. It's coming for you from space to wipe all living things from the face of the earth. Beware of the creeping unknown. This woman is about to learn a terrible secret. She will never be the same again. Because this man knows that same secret, he will never speak again. To both of them has come terror in the form of The Creeping Unknown.
Yeah, they got into Hammer. They got into horror through a science fiction angle, and they were doing that as a way to push the X rating through science fiction.
Yeah, and the actual official title of the Quatermass Experiment, the movie version, is Xperiment, which is kind of, a double meaning. And back then, having an X rating, and the X rating in England back then is totally different than the American, what we think of as an X-rated movie today. It was basically an R-rated kind of thing. But
which is like PG today.
Yeah, exactly. But back then, like an X rating in England was like this. Oh, God, this must be this horrible thing. But they decided to do a Frankenstein film. And at first, I think they were going to do it black and white, and then they decided to do it in color. They hired one of Britain's biggest TV stars, a man by the name of Peter Cushing.
Having seen the original Frankenstein picture with Colin Clive, my hero in Journey's End, of course, for the stand-up, and James Whale directing it, and I'd seen that, and it was a pretty jolly good film, I thought, that old black and white one. And I thought this would be a wonderful picture to make. So I asked my agent if they'd bring up Sir James Careers and ask him if he still wanted me, because he'd been on free all over these years to try and get me, and I'd never been free, and now I was. And that's how it worked. So I was absolutely thrilled. They did it within the budget and within the schedule, and America just could not believe that such a quality film could be made for that amount of money in that amount of time. They just would not and could not believe it. It just took off, went all over the world, particularly America, where they were bonkers about it. Then everywhere else, north, south, east, and west. Japan loved it, adored it. So that really, I think, put the seal on my international fame, in inverted commas.
They got Christopher Lee as the monster because Christopher Lee was tall, and that's basically the main reason they got him as the monster.
Hammer Films was looking for a very tall, very big man. And I think they'd learned that I'd done a lot of mime and things like that in the theatre in the preceding 10 years, and they wanted somebody who could play a part without speaking, and who was tall and who was big. So for the first time in my career as an actor, these two elements helped me rather than hindered me.
And The Curse of Frankenstein became a huge hit, especially in America and other countries, and that's where it just all started off from then. And this also coincides with the in America, the Shock Theater, where that's where there was the beginning of the horror film host, and they were actually running the old Universal movies on TV, and there was this monster boom, and you had Famous Monsters of Filmland, the magazine, and so all the old monsters were coming back, and Hammer totally capitalized on that, because they were basically, and it's funny because people like me complain and moan about remakes, but that's basically what Hammer started doing. They started remaking all the old horror film classics. But back then, they were in color, which had never been done before. If you look at old Hammer, original Hammer posters, they always say brand new and in color, because they wanted people to know we're not just re-releasing something you saw on TV. This is a different Dracula. This is a different Frankenstein. It's totally new and it's in color. So that's where
that's
they really
definitely worth mentioning too. They like you said, they were originally planning the Frankenstein picture as a quickie. And they had this script, and it was they said that it would have come out as something like 60 minutes, and they weren't happy with where the script was, so they let
Jimmy
Sangster rewrite it, and that's a name
he basically was like he was like an assistant director.
He's basically responsible for the whole success, really. I mean, when you come down to it.
The thing about Hammer is that, like Terrence Fisher, he had been working for Hammer for years. He had just been directing these quota quickies, and he was just another, director who just came in and did his job, and that was it. But everything in Hammer was very much within the family, so to speak. It was kind of in-house, and even when they started making all these monster movies, they had their own kind of like stock company, not just Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. You see the same actors over and over again. That's part of the Hammer atmosphere. That's part of the whole Hammer package. It's part of the ritual, I guess, is the best way to put it.
They had to send their scripts to the British board before they were made.
Yeah.
And I have a quote here from the British board's response to Jimmy Sangster's Frankenstein script. It was written by Audrey Field on October 10, 1956. We are concerned about the flavor of this script, which, in its preoccupation with horror and gruesome detail, goes far beyond what we are accustomed to allow, even for the X category. I'm afraid we can give no assurance that we should be able to pass a film based on the present script, and a revised script should be sent to us for comments in which the overall unpleasantness should be mitigated.
Yeah.
And they filmed that original script. They didn't change it.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure Hammer, when that report came back, they were probably licking their chops like, yeah, that's exactly what we want to hear. But, yeah, and you probably read about this, too, in your research, and some people say that this is kind of an urban legend, but I've heard that when they would put these scripts together, they would actually, it would be far more worse than what they expected to actually film, because that way they could make a deal with the censor. The censor would say, we can't have this. And they would say, well, we'll take this scene out if you let us keep this scene. It was kind of like a game almost. They put something in the script that they knew was never going to get filmed, just something totally outrageous. And then when the censor would come back and say, well, we can't, and they'd say, well, we'll just take that scene out, and then just so.
Yeah, that was
whether that's actually true or not, it wouldn't surprise me.
That was an old trick that they used to pull around the old Hays Code. Once that was initiated too, they would put all this extra stuff in there.
Yeah,
and they'd bargain it away and try to distract from the actual lasciviousness that they were trying to hide.
And I'm sure the British censor, whoever it was, I mean, he also realizes, because these movies were going all over the world making a ton of money, he's probably also realizing, I can't totally shut these guys down because these guys are actually bringing in money to the country, so you don't want to,
right.
You want to get too far on them. So I'm pretty sure there was a lot of, given, kind of like under the table kind of agreements and things like that going on.
I'm not familiar with the global presence of Hammer before those science fiction. I know Quatermass and X the Unknown, which was the follow-up, also playing on the X rating there. I know those had quite a bit of notoriety outside of Britain, but I'm not sure what kind of reach they had before that part of the 50s.
Yeah, I don't think they really had much, because remember, they were making these quota quickies, so these films are, they're not going to go out like in America. They were basically made for the British market.
Right.
And when they start making the science fiction movies, well, they could sell, science fiction and horror, that you can sell that anywhere. And remember, in the 50s, you had all the double features going on, so somebody would, you'd make a low-budget monster movie, and, well, we need something to go with it, and I think the Quatermass Experiment, the American title was A Creeping Unknown. I don't remember exactly what film that played with. I'm sure somebody out there probably does. I think X the Unknown was the same thing. It probably played with, some other movie as well. I mean, that's basically that's really where Hammer, they were. The studios at that time, I mean, you know this better than anybody. The American studio system wasn't in the best marketplace, in the late 50s and early 60s. And here's Hammer, who's basically making these monster movies better than the Americans could now, and they're giving them this product, and you could pay them a certain fee to get this film. So I'm sure the American producers, the American studios, were making some pretty good money off of these things too.
Yeah, they had to have been, because there really wasn't much horror production going on at all. The American system had gone strictly to sci-fi.
Yeah. And you had American International, but they were almost like basically just the American version of Hammer.
Yeah,
in a way. I mean, they were very, very. You've seen, especially the Roger Corman movies before he turned to Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, these things had no budget whatsoever.
Corman was reacting to the success of Hammer. So.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, is that American International basically, they went to Poe and they went to color, and there's a lot of similarities between the Poe movies and the Hammer films. And I love the Poe movies. I love Vincent Price, but honestly, overall, I think that the Hammer films are much they're much better all the way through.
They are, top to bottom, really. I mean, there's a couple of exceptions you could always point to. Like I would say the Mask of the Red Death, something like that with a really lavish production.
Yeah, but you notice the Mask of the Red Death was filmed in England.
True.
and I think one of the things Roger Corman wanted to do, especially with I was going to say the real thing that Hammer had over American International was just the overall cast. Because if you take away Vincent Price from those Poe movies, I mean, and you had Karloff and Peter Lorre and a couple of them, but when it comes to like the supporting cast, it's like nobody remembers anybody. No. Whereas in Hammer, just the overall cast, I think because the English actors, you put them in costume and you put them in these type of films, and they just look totally right for it.
They looked right, and they treated the material with a respect that maybe didn't deserve.
Yeah. I've read so many interviews with a lot of them. I think a lot of them just, to them, I think the English actor at that time, they were more, this is a job. This is a thing of work. It wasn't like, somebody's, oh my God, I'm in this horror movie. This is horrible. To them, it's like, you know what, I have to pay my bills. This is. And a lot of them were appearing, in all these various stage productions. So for them, it was okay. Yeah, I'll do this Hammer movie. I'll make some, quick money. But no, when you watch the Hammer films, and I think once you get to some of them in the 70s, that the casting kind of went down a little bit. But for the most part, the actors in the Hammer films, they take it totally seriously. And I think that's another reason. You ask me, why do these films hold up? I think acting-wise, you look at the acting in American horror and science fiction films in the 50s and the 60s now, and it's just, that's where the cheesiness factor, and that's where people, make fun of these types of films. And you look at the Hammer films, and, obviously Cushing and Lee, but just the supporting cast overall,
it's like rare. It's rare that someone stands out in a supporting role, even as someone who's a lesser actor.
Yeah, in that English stage tradition, I think you could find some of these, so many of these character actors. Andre Morell, he's going to be in. We're going to be talking about him in Plague of the Zombies. He was a friend of David Lean. He's in The Bridge on the River Kwai. He's in Summertime. In America, they would, we can't do this. I think, like I said, to them, it's a job. It's something I need to do to pay the bills, and I don't think they really look down on it. I think there was, like I said, Hammer was almost, it was a family company. It was very low budget. It was basically, when they were at Bray Studios, Bray Studios was basically a manor house, next to the Thames River, and they had like the little cafeteria in there. It was, and you read the interviews with these actors in these films, and they just love that is just that type of atmosphere.
It's like a campus, really. They had
that's basically what it was. So no, I think once they got out of Bray Studios in the late '60s and early '70s, and that's when things started to kind of go south, and the
feel of the films really changed. That studio, as much as anything, gave Hammer that Hammer look, that
exactly,
feel.
Yeah.
That you can always identify.
Mm-hmm. And if you're like me, you can watch these films and you can say, oh yeah, well I've seen that chair before, I've seen that light before, I see that staircase, but that in a way that gives you that familiarity. It's almost like comfort food. If you're a Hammer fan, you see these films over and over again.
Yeah, and it really is too. You can step into any Hammer film from that era and feel an immediate connection with it.
Mm-hmm.
And you may not love them all, but there's an appreciation and
like,
a warmth.
It's like you have a kid or a relative that drives you nuts, but at the same time, you're gonna put up with them for the most part and accept it for what it is. So
that's the thing. I've never seen a Hammer horror movie from the heyday, we'll call it maybe, that I would say was a bad movie or that I regretted watching.
Yeah.
And I see plenty of bad horror movies that I regret watching, but none of them have been a Hammer horror movie.
Yeah, like I said, they hold up like a lot better than even I expect. Even like the ones that are not really all that great, you still have the production design, you still have the great photography, you still have this, the great cast, and of course, the beautiful women, which I totally admit is a main reason why so many people get into these films.
Not a negative.
No, not at all. I mean, that's that's part of the Hammer tradition. So,
all right, I think that's a great overview for anyone that isn't quite as familiar with the Hammer production style.
Yeah.
So let's now dive into your first recommendation, which is 1961 Scream of Fear, a.k.a. Taste of Fear.
Taste of Fear.
Which is a ridiculous title for a horror film.
Take a good look at this face. Caught by the camera at the split-second peak of screaming terror. It is the only face we are permitted to show you in this story of a girl encircled by evil, enveloped in a living nightmare. A girl driven by terror to near insanity.
Shocks, such as the one that you had last night, can deal the mind a very serious blow. A blow which could affect it permanently.
You mean I could go mad?
A couple of Hammer movies did have different titles that sometimes kind of throws people. Like Horror of Dracula in England was just called Dracula, and me being American, I always refer to it as Horror of Dracula, and the Hammer fans on the internet who are English, no, it's Dracula, it's not Horror of Dracula, it's Dracula, like, whatever. But anyway, Scream of Fear is, the reason I picked that is it's not a gothic Hammer horror film. It's more like a psychological thriller, almost like a mini Hitchcock, Les Diaboliques. They had a run in the early 60s. They filmed these black and white kind of Hitchcock type of films. I'm sure Psycho definitely, the reason they did that was because of the success of Psycho. And Jimmy Sangster wrote most of these. And the reason he started writing these, he was so sick and tired of writing the Gothics. He had written so many of them, and he wrote some of them for other companies. He was just totally out of ideas, so he started, writing these mini Hitchcocks, and Scream of Fear was the first one. And it's black and white. It's set in contemporary times. It's not, in a Gothic Neverland or anything like that. But it's a very effective thriller, especially if you've never seen it before, because it has a very, very well done twist at the end.
It is. It was a surprising movie. I watched it for the first time probably 3 or 4 years ago. I'm sure it was a recommendation from someone else because it was just not a movie that was on my radar.
Yeah.
And it really surprised me. I mean, you're right. It's absolutely kind of a reaction to Psycho, but it's a really inventive film, and then you mentioned the twist, and it doesn't feel disingenuous. Those late game twists can really send a movie in two directions. Either you're going to roll your eyes and check out for the rest of the film, or it's going to grip you. And this one grips you. Yeah.
And the other thing, it doesn't have the typical Hammer cast. I mean, Christopher Lee's in it, but he actually has a very small role, and I don't want to give too much away, but his role is, it's sort of, what's the best way I can put this? It's sort of it's not what you expect, and it doesn't really have the familiar Hammer stock company. I think, Susan Strasberg is like the leading lady, so I mean, it's not even English leading lady. So it's a Hammer film, but it almost, in a way, like, goes against what Hammer was doing at the time, but it's very well done, and it's It's on DVD, I believe. It's also on Blu-ray now, and when you see it in widescreen, excellent black and white photography. It looks great.
Well, let's talk about the plot in that you can see how it comes from Psycho. So the young paralyzed woman, Susan Strasberg, she returns home to her family. Is kind of an estate. It's a kind of a sprawling.
Yeah.
So and that's key.
And she hasn't been home in a while. They lay out in the start of the film that she has some mental problems. That's why she's been away, and she hasn't seen her father in a while. And she's all excited about being reunited with her father. And her stepmother says, "Well, your dad's away, on business." And well, she keeps seeing her dad's dead body over and over and over again. But there's just so many different layers to it, and it's one of those ones where when you find out the twist, you almost have to rewatch it again to catch everything again, because the twist makes you look at the story in a totally different way. And the director was a man by the name of Seth Holt, and Seth Holt didn't have a very extensive career. Which is curious to me, because the direction in this film is so tight. And he went on to direct a few episodes of Danger Man, and I think he directed did he direct The Nanny?
He did, and Blood from the Mummy's Tomb were
that's
most
where
notable.
he passed away
during
the making of that. But I think it's one of Jimmy Sangster's best scripts, and I think there's this debate among Hammer fans. Well, Hammer fans will debate anything. They'll debate whether the sun came out. But anyway, how great a writer was Jimmy Sangster? Because there is actual knowledge that, for example, Peter Cushing would basically rewrite his lines all the time. He didn't like Jimmy Sangster's dialogue. I think Jimmy Sangster, he was a very good idea man. I think that's where his strength as a writer was the idea and setting up the plots and everything. And with those type of mini Hitchcock films, you don't have to worry about character development so much. It's more like the plotting, and I think that was probably his. That's definitely one of his best scripts.
And with this movie, it really is the hook, the reoccurring appearance of the dead body.
Yeah.
And it keeps the viewer in sort of this suspended wait for the next appearance. You are constantly wondering and trying to feel out when it's going to happen. And he does keep constantly surprising you throughout the movie. Christopher Lee said that was the best film Hammer ever made.
Really? Well, yeah, I've read in other interviews where he said other movies.
I know he liked to throw that around, but I think it is worth mentioning because he doesn't play a huge role in the movie. So maybe as a supporting role, that maybe it's a bigger vote of confidence for the movie. I don't know. It is a movie that is not well known at all.
No, because like I said, when people think of Hammer, they think of the color gothics, they think of the women in the nightgowns and the monsters, and this isn't like that at all. You were talking about how Seth Holt directed it. He directs in a very, yes, there's the shocks, but it's very understated. It isn't like William Castle, like Homicidal, where there's all this, crazy stuff going on, and everybody's overacting, and the characters are, very cliched. It's a very understated, very gripping film, and it's like I said, it's almost like. I think Jimmy Sangster kind of got fed up, and he just wanted to do something in that vein, but he didn't want to make it like another typical Hammer movie.
And for anyone interested, that movie is available on I believe it's a Mill Creek.
Yep, good old Mill Creek.
With, Never Take Candy from a Stranger, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and that's actually a very good film as well. And I will say this for people that may want to have a cheaper alternative or just a DVD alternative. Sony came out a few years ago with a Hammer suspense set, and Scream of Fear is on it, and it's a very yes, it's DVD, but it's still a very excellent anamorphic widescreen train. Yeah, all the Columbia DVDs, the Hammer DVDs that they put out are excellent looking. like I said, whoever owns that's the other thing about Hammer, because people tell me, well, why isn't there like a massive Hammer box set? Well, the problem with that is they made so many deals with so many different companies that it's literally impossible to have like a Hammer mega set. You just can't do it. Scream of Fear is Columbia, for example.
And you can't even get like say, oh, well, why isn't there a Hammer Dracula set? Even if you want to break it down into you can't even do that.
Horror of Dracula.
It's frustrating for people who aren't really steeped in the Hammer knowledge to piece together the collections, and you can't even get them all here. They're not all available.
Yeah, I think even in England you couldn't even get them like that, because I think some of the American companies actually like own some of the. I mean, I'm definitely no expert on like the rights issues, but
I know Warner's got a few in their pocket. So.
Oh yeah. But and there's some Hammer films that haven't even really been released on DVD or Blu-ray, or at least an official version or a decent version. It's just because everybody's used to Universal. I mean, every year Universal re-releases the monster collection. That's.
Speaking of the devil, we got another one coming out that just came out there for the big box set plus all
the
DVD sets.
And Universal just does that to death, and people are always like, well, how come Hammer can't do that? Well, because they literally can't do that.
Yeah. Those rights issues are tricky things.
Yeah,
especially for
and we'll get in even more of that once we talk about some of these other movies too.
All right, number 2 on your list is a movie I just watched for the first time a couple weeks ago. It is called The Kiss of the Vampire.
A young couple in love, enjoying a romantic honeymoon, enjoying the pleasure of each other's company, knowing the sublime happiness of the kiss of love. But the kiss of love is a stranger here, where only evil is good, and the only kiss, the kiss of the vampire.
You know what a vampire is?
Yes. I've heard of vampire bats.
No, not bats. Vampires. Human vampires.
The Kiss of the Vampire is a spine-chilling drama of two young people who strayed by chance into a nightmare in a twilight world of terror.
Oh, 1963, directed by Don Sharp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this movie. I think it's one of their best gothics. I think it's one of their best vampire films. For a long time, it got when I was really starting to get into Hammer, like back in the 1980s, whenever anybody would talk about this movie in the monster movie books or the magazines, they would just kind of dismiss it. Just another typical Hammer, because it doesn't have Cushing, it doesn't have Lee, it doesn't have Dracula. But if you get away from all that and just look at it for what it is one of their best and most striking gothic films.
Well, I think that's an important point, too, because there are really kind of tiers of perception. Mm-hmm. You have the major franchises, the Dracula, Frankenstein, and those are obviously very visible. And then you have the films with the two major stars, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Yeah. And then you have the other movies. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty universal. Those other movies, no matter how successful they were at the time or how well made they are, how we respect them now, they do not get the attention.
Kiss of the Vampire, it kind of plays with the vampire rules, because you have this coven of vampires. There is one major vampire. His name is Ravna. I think he's Baron Ravna or Count Ravna. Can't remember.
He's a doctor. I remember him being a doctor for.
Yes, Dr. Ravna. Dr. Ravna. Oh, jeez. I should know these things.
It's just because I watched it.
Well, I'm glad you did, because, like I said, if anybody's going to know it, I should know it. No, Dr. Ravna.
I'm just here to fill in the gaps, right? So,
yeah.
All right.
Played by Noel Willman, and he gives this really very creepy performance, but it's not your typical vampire performance.
He's no Gary Oldman in Dracula, I tell you what.
No, it's very studied, very mannered, but he's not so over the top that, I mean, from the first time you see him in the film, you know there's something different about the guy, and you can probably figure out, he's the main threat. But he plays it in a way you're not really quite sure where he's coming from.
It's the whole family, too. You're not really sure where the whole family is coming from.
Exactly, because even I've seen this film dozens of times, and I'm still kind of unsure who was the one girl his daughter, was the one girl his son. There's a lot of ambiguity about who these vampires are. I think in one of the lines of dialogue he says, I was doing a scientific experiment and it went wrong, and that kind of makes you wonder, did he somehow turn everybody into vampires? I like ambiguity in a lot of these films, because I think one of the problems with a lot of modern movies, especially science fiction and horror films, they tend to over-explain everything. And when you have some ambiguity, it kind of helps your imagination along. You kind of like fill in the gaps yourself. It doesn't really explain too much. And I know some people, especially people who do nothing but watch modern movies, it just drives them crazy when everything isn't explained. And I always tell people it's a movie. Just go with it. If you can't go with it, then you probably shouldn't watch it in the first place.
Well, I think that there's something to be said there. I mean, there's over-explaining especially I think when it comes to the motivations of villains in films.
Exactly.
Once you start demystifying the mania or the sociopathic tendencies, you're detracting from the actual act themselves, and it's not necessarily related, but it falls in line here. I just saw Bad Times, the El Royale last week, and the movie's biggest fault is that they try to give the villain so much backstory, and it just slows the film to a crawl. And I'm sitting there and watching it. As I'm watching it, this is all unnecessary. This movie doesn't explain his coven of vampires or whatever he's collecting here. And I never cared.
No,
it didn't matter.
That's the thing. If you're a fan of classic horror and science fiction, you have to have some imagination yourself. You have to have some sort of creativity and accept the story for what it is, and not. I think way too many modern film goers just totally pick and choose. Just go over every little facet of a movie. And that wouldn't have happened. It's like, look, it's a movie, okay? It's not real life, anyways. And that's the other thing about Hammer. Their films were basically 80 to 90 minutes long, and I'm going to get on my old man soapbox again. And another thing about modern movies, everything's like 2 and 2.5 hours long.
It's too damn long.
And when you're dealing with fantastic elements, well, if you for an 80-minute movie, you can probably get away with a lot of stuff. But once you stretch it out to 2 hours, all of a sudden it's not that fantastic anymore. That's when it does start to get unbelievable. And I think Hammer had that perfect kind of running time where it's long enough to make its point and to be a complete story, but it isn't so overlong that you start seeing the plot holes and the gaps and you start seeing that it is a low-budget film. And then Kiss of the Vampire is a perfect example of that. And, you being the James Bond fan that you are, Kiss of the Vampire has a very good pre-credit sequence. Probably one of the best sequences, I think, in Hammer film history.
It's true.
There's no dialogue. There's no explanation. There's this funeral going on. It's a very Hammer-looking graveyard. It's Hammerland, and you have this very... shady-looking gentleman, in a beard. He looks like he's a bit worse for wear. He shows up, and you start to realize, well, he must be related to whoever they're burying, and he looks like he's going to take the shovel and put some dirt on it, and he takes the shovel and he pounds it right through the coffin, and the blood spurts, and then James Bernard's fantastic score for this film rises up, and then that starts off the movie with a bang.
It really does.
a fantastic opening sequence, and I think that alone is, and the rest of the movie is great too. But that alone, I think, if you've never heard of Kiss of the Vampire, that's definitely one reason to see the film right there.
And I'm a fan, and I didn't know that this movie really existed until you sent me your list. And
I'm surprised
I owned it.
because you're a very astute film buff. I'm surprised you didn't, because
it's odd because I kind of watch the Hammer films as I acquire them. I've never made a point to sit down with a series of Hammer films. Like, I've never sat and watched Dracula. I've never gone through the chronological order like I have with a lot of other franchises or actors and because of the way we receive these piecemeal on weird editions where there's four completely unrelated movies, and it came out. This is released on another piecemeal 8-movie Universal set, I think. Yeah,
and they not that long ago they put it on Blu-ray, and that's the one where people were whining about the aspect ratio.
Right.
But I mean, they look absolutely gorgeous. I mean, Kiss of the Vampire on Blu-ray looks, just absolutely fantastic.
It does. It looks terrific. And as I was watching it, it's one of those times where I was really in awe of their use of color.
Mm-hmm.
And it really comes through in this version.
That the party sequence where Jennifer Daniel, a gorgeous-looking blonde, and we'll be talking about her with a reptile, but she wears this red dress, and I mean, it's just stunning, And once again, Hammer didn't spend a lot of money, but if you look at just their costumes, the costumes look absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's remarkable what they could milk from their production values because of that estate and their wardrobe, and that the way that they use light and color in these films.
Yes.
The color, especially thinking about this film, it doesn't look like a 1963 film.
No.
And part of that is just the way that I don't even, the color is vibrant in ways that you don't associate with British film from that era.
No, you're absolutely right. And once again, I have to get on my old man movie soapbox. But my friend Josh Kennedy, who does make movies, one of the things we just drive us nuts about modern movies is color desaturation. We just totally just absolutely gets me crazy.
It's a non-existent art form now. Like
there's
no attention paid to
they're
it.
afraid to use color, and I think when people do see a Hammer film, especially on Blu-ray, and they're probably shocked because it's like, my God, the color, and I'm sure a lot of them probably think, did they, do something with this? Did they recolor it? Or no, that's the way, that's the way they film those things. That was like I said before, that was the selling point of a lot of these films was, this is in color, because nobody had made Gothic films in color up to that time. I mean, now, you take it for granted, and now it's going, they make movies where they try to look like it's black and white, but it isn't. And to me, that's just, that's kind of gutless, It's like, oh, well, we can't make a black and white movie because, the kids won't like it, so we'll just desaturate the color. It's like, you're basically not doing anything for anybody, but...
Well, it is something to note, too. Blood in Hammer film.
Yeah, Kensington gore
is unmistakable.
Yeah, it's almost, because I know there are people that the sight of blood just drives me nuts, but in a Hammer movie, it's almost not like real blood. It's almost like kind of a fantasy version of blood.
And I think there's something to that for a movie watcher who doesn't necessarily take to horror. Because,
exactly, yeah.
They've probably been raised on, American horror, which really started up again in the 70s, and then reached its peak in the 80s, which was the slasher movie. And what we're dealing with there is an entirely different animal. It became increasingly more realistic until
these are fairy tales,
right.
Just like Veronica Carlson told me. These are adult fairy tales.
The subject matter is of a horrific nature, but the films themselves are not horrific. And there's an accessibility here, and I think it's worth mentioning with regards to Kiss of the Vampire, that anybody can jump in and appreciate what's going on here. Broader cinema fans may shy away because of maybe Hammer has a reputation.
Oh yeah, trust me, they do. It's whenever people talk about Hammer, and Hammer, the very name Hammer has become kind of like a catch-all. It's like, nobody asks for a facial tissue, they ask for a Kleenex. It's the same thing. Any cheesy horror movie from the 60s and 70s, that's one of those Hammer movies, and 90% of the time it isn't, but people automatically assume that it is.
And it's not to say that they didn't make, cheesy movies, because some of these are pure ridiculousness. But if we're looking at the craft, in even like the Kiss of the Vampire, Scream of Fear, I mean, we could go all the way forward to Captain Chronos, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, which is a remarkable film just from a visual filmmaking perspective.
And once again, they had barely any budget to do these things. That's the thing that amazes me. I've got plenty of Hammer books which actually have like blueprints and maps of Bray Studios, and it probably wasn't any bigger than, like I said, it was basically a manor house. That was their studio. I mean, you hear. I've read stories where literally the sound guy would have to stand outside the room and put the boom through the window. I mean, these are that's how they film these things.
While we're talking about Kiss of the Vampire too, there's a progressive sexual element present in Kiss of the Vampire in particular. Hammer was already pushing the envelope in terms of what they were suggesting in terms of sexuality on screen. And most people would point to heaving bosoms in a gothic setting as like the trademark Hammer for at least the 60s sexuality. But it became much more interesting after I sat back and thought about it. So the premise of the movie is this couple, newlywed couple, it's the old driving through the country road, breakdown, here's a hospitable old home that wants to shelter us for the night.
Yeah.
The Dr. Ravna character takes an especial shine to the woman.
Jennifer Daniel.
Right, Jennifer Daniel.
Can't blame him for that.
No, not at all. And as an act of liberation from her newly bound wedding shackles, she is removed from the picture and inducted into his coven.
Yeah.
And then he pretends, for the husband's sake, that she never existed, and we have
so you have kind of a
Kafka-esque wake up and nothing is as it was supposed to be scenario, a nightmare puzzle. But the liberation from the old stodgy shackles of marriage in British society would have been a little bit of a stir, suggesting that the vampires were the sexual liberators of women.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's, when anybody who discusses, like Bram Stoker's Dracula, they always bring that up.
These were very, very progressive representations of sexuality on screen.
Are you getting ready to talk about the spit scene? Are you leading up to that?
A little bit, yeah. I was hoping you're going to take it from there.
Okay. Well, yeah, because once again, to go back to Jennifer Daniel, she's the young bride, and English actor by the name of Edward D'Souza, who I'm sure you know had a very small role in The Spy Who Loved Me.
Yes.
He's the stalwart hero, and he's actually one of the better Hammer heroes. Most of the Hammer regular, ordinary leading men were kind of like, kind of like David Manners, in the Universal films. They're just they're basically useless. But actually, Edward de Souza, he's believable. He's not like a dunce. You actually, he's a very good actor.
It's a tough sell too when they remove his wife and trying to convince him that she was never there to begin with, and that could go sideways really quickly with an actor that wasn't up to that task.
But the other thing is that Edward de Souza and Jennifer Daniel, they're a totally believable couple. You totally buy into the fact that they're married, that they have like a real relationship. It's not like a movie relationship. And so what happens is when she is inducted into the coven, and Edward de Souza does find out about it, and Ravna basically tells him, what's going on, almost like the James Bond villain speech. And they bring him into the castle, and they show him, what his wife is now, and she literally spits in his face. And, people didn't spit a lot in any movie back in the 1960s.
It was kind of shocking. It was unexpected.
It is. It's a shocking moment. It has nothing to do with gore or violence, because Jennifer Daniel is just such a nice, very kind, very attractive, but she's very down-to-earth, realistic, you totally believe her as a very domesticated, the type of woman, your parents would want to marry. Mm-hmm. And she just like spits in his face. And it sounds kind of funny, you and I discussing it, but I mean, when you see it in the film, it kind of like really, shocks you. And once again, it's not, Kensington gore. It's not violent or bloody. It's just, because of the buildup of the character and the buildup of the situation, it totally works. And that's something that the Hammer movies don't get a lot of credit for, characterization or, plot development. They're just considered, monster movies. And I think Hammer overall is a lot more complicated than people give it credit. The whole catalog is a lot more complicated than people give it credit for.
It's true. And this film in particular could be watched and not thought twice about. Really. But it really works, and it sinks in even more. Like I said, after it's done. I mean, that spitting moment is really a reaction against the institution. I mean, it's a visceral moment.
And because once again, Jennifer Daniel has, she's shown this, throughout the movie, this character, this very domesticated, very nice, young lady. For her to do it, she's not one of these, really wild. She's not Ingrid Pitt, is what I'm trying to say. She's not.
We haven't gotten to vampire lovers just yet.
Yeah, exactly. She's not one of these over the top, I mean, I love all the Hammer ladies, so I don't want to, get into trouble here. But she, she's the Jennifer Daniel, and we're going to talk about her in the Reptile as well. She's the domesticated Hammer hottie. Right. So when she spits in his face, it's I definitely see what you're. I probably don't see it as much that way as you did, but I think because you were seeing it for the very first time, you probably picked up on it. Whereas somebody like me who's a bit more familiar with it probably, But no, I totally get what you're saying.
That's the thing. I mean, that's the thing. We were talking about the multiple readings, and you can look at it as just a very, like I said, the visceral reaction to that moment in the film, and it's shocking there. And then you can take it this other direction as a commentary on the kept woman in British society too. I mean, there's a lot going on here.
Well, and the other thing is they try to turn Edward de Souza. They want to initiate him into basically, you're going to be one of us. You're going to, be in our little society. And obviously the society isn't just blood drinking. It's other stuff going on as well.
Indeed.
I think this movie gets overlooked because there's no Cushing, there's no Lee. Terrence Fisher didn't direct it. Don Sharp did, but Don Sharp did an excellent job. And he didn't direct too many Hammer films. I think the other one he did was Rasputin the Mad Monk, which is actually a pretty good film. The problem with that is, they're trying to do like, the entire Russian Empire, and they just didn't have the budget for that. But Don Sharp, he directed the first two Fu Manchu movies, the best Christopher Lee Fu Manchu movies. He directed a film called Witchcraft, which stars Lon Chaney Jr., the early 60s film, a British film. It's probably one of Lon Chaney Jr.'s best late films, because in the late 60s he was like reduced to, he was in some really bad movies, or he would do like a cameo in some Western. But
he was a broken man at that point.
Exactly. But in Witchcraft, even though he's supposed to be playing this English character, and he's about as un-English as anybody can be, he actually comes off pretty good. And that's a film, heck, one day you and I have to talk about that. That is definitely a film that is definitely worth going out and getting a copy of, or at least trying to see. Witchcraft, Don Sharp. Yeah, Don Sharp, and did he direct Psychomania?
I don't know. I don't know who directs that.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of some other. I think he might have done some knockoff Bond movies in the '60s, if I remember correctly. But he's another one of those very efficient English directors that just doesn't seem to get a lot of credit, especially, like I said, from Hammer fans, because he's not Terrence Fisher. Because it's like, well, the best Hammer director was Terrence Fisher, which he was, but everybody else just kind of gets, shoved to the side. And I think looking at the list, I think I only picked the one Terrence Fisher film, but we'll discuss that when we come to it.
It might be interesting to note that this was intended to be part of the Dracula series for Hammer too. It was going to be a non Christopher Lee Dracula film. Yeah, from what I have read from several sources, the ending of Kiss of the Vampire was supposed to be the ending of The Brides of Dracula, and Peter Cushing was against it, because what happens is at the end of the Kiss of the Vampire, and maybe people want to fast forward in case they want to actually see the movie, which I do recommend, and they don't want to know the ending. You just say it was very un-Van Helsing.
Yeah. Basically, the savant, the older gentleman that I talked about in the pre-credit sequence, he uses the dark forces to stick it to the vampires, basically. He uses the dark forces against the vampires, and Peter Cushing said, well, Van Helsing would never do that. And Peter Cushing had a very good point, because, that the Van Helsing character that Peter Cushing portrayed, that character that he developed basically on his own, definitely that wasn't his, his way of dealing with things. So they kind of took that and they put it in the Kiss the Vampire. That's something else that once again, it's a very family-run company. They would have these scripts laying around. They would use certain scenes that they cut out or they couldn't use. They would refashion them and put them into another film.
All right. I think, and to conclude this particular section, Don Sharp did indeed direct Psychomania.
Oh, hey! I'm not as bad as I thought.
That brings us to 1964 and The Gorgon.
It has been said that every legend and myth known to mankind is not entirely without some truth. It was here, under a full moon, in the little village of Van Dorf, that an ancient legend suddenly terrifyingly came to life.
Doctor, you'll perform an autopsy.
On a body that's turned to stone?
Have you ever heard of Megara?
Megara?
It's said that when mortals looked upon her face, they were turned to stone.
Leave Vandorf before it's too late.
What is it you're afraid of?
I'm afraid for you.
Or of what I may discover, if I remain.
We want you out of this house, mister. Now.
For 2,000 years, Megara the Gorgon had kept her evil peace. But now this strange, unearthly creature returns to petrify every human being who crosses her path. Starring Peter Cushing as the doctor. Did his strange talents direct him to medicine or murder? Christopher Lee is the professor, confronted by a conspiracy of silence that paralyzed a village with terror.
Megara died 2,000 years ago. It's her spirit we're concerned with today. It's found a resting place in somebody.
Also starring Richard Pascoe, Barbara Shelley, Michael Goodliff. The terrifying realism of the Gorgon. She comes to life and brings death to all those who look upon her face.
Carla! I am waiting for Carla, Mr. Hinds.
Oh,
Directed
Joshua Kennedy's favorite film of all time. I gotta say that.
Is his favorite. This is probably. I've never thought about it for too long, but this might be my favorite Hammer film as well.
Really?
Yeah, I love.
Well, you just became a friend of Joshua Kennedy. Well, the reason I picked this one, it is a Cushing Lee film. It is directed by Terence Fisher, but it is, and I think you'll agree with me on this, it is the most unlikely Cushing Lee Fisher collaboration.
It is.
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And also, I also remember mentioning that Barbara Shelley has a major role in the film, and that is an unusual event as well for Hammer.
Yeah. Well, when I first saw it, and this was like back in the 1980s, and this is when I was really getting into Hammer, and Cushing and Lee are my heroes. I'll just state that. If anybody hasn't figured that out yet.
Nobody's going to argue with you.
When I first saw it, I was kind of disappointed. I was like, well, gee, they only have one scene together, and then the Gorgon didn't really come out too well, and the Gorgon is one of those films, it demands multiple viewings. It's not a film that knocks you over the head the first time you see it. Maybe it did for you. And I know it did for Joshua Kennedy, but it's a film, especially if you come into it, expecting, the Cushing Lee interplay, expecting the whole Terence Fisher thing. It's really a tragic love story. It's not a monster movie at all. And I think when I started watching it more and more, and especially when you see it on widescreen, and you see a really nice print of it, you start to realize, you start to appreciate it more and more, because Cushing and Lee are not the main stars. The main stars are Richard Pascoe and Barbara Shelley. And Cushing plays a very un-Cushing type role, and Christopher Lee plays a very untypical Lee role. Some people would say that Cushing is playing the Lee role and Lee is playing the Cushing role. I think that's kind of an overgeneralization, because I think Cushing and Lee were like Hammer. I think there's a lot more complexity to their personas than people give them credit for.
Well, they were as the most visible pair, they were also in the most visible movies, and if you only watched the most visible Hammer films, the ones that make the most rounds, I could see where they're coming from. I don't remember thinking that on my first viewing, probably because the whole thing felt like it was a different universe. Like, it just feels outside the general scope. And I'd watch this.
It's not part of Hammerland, is what you're trying to say?
A little bit. Like, I'm not saying it doesn't have the same feel. Not to recall MC Hammer too directly, but the Hammer groove. It's a real state of mind, because you watch quite a few of these in a row. You get in the mood.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I think that's why it took me a long time to really get into it. You have to look at it. It's like a tragic love story, and if you look at the posters for it and the trailer, they sold it like, you know, your typical monster movie. And I know when it came out, when it did, it was not one of their most successful films, and I think that kind of hurt Terrence Fisher with Hammer. He was already kind of hurting because he had directed their big version of Phantom of the Opera, which didn't do very well. It wasn't Terrence Fisher's fault. The script was really bad. I mean, yeah, I could spend 2 hours with you just talking about the Hammer Phantom of the Opera and the problems with that. But no, the Gorgon is just it is a very different Hammer film. You do have a female monster, but you can also debate, is she really a monster?
Right.
You know,
I mean, they're going outside the traditional monster realm here, and they're pulling from obviously a Greek mythology to get the character of the Gorgon, and the Gorgon, you know, the Greeks weren't much for, you know, pure evil in not to reduce Greek storytelling down to the just most basic concepts, but there is a lot of gray. Their versions were often, you know, there is evil and good in everything.
Yeah.
And the Gorgon is you know, is as the Medusa-like character. You know, they're not saying it's strictly Medusa here because they're taking liberties with that myth, but it's like you said. This is a tragedy rather than a horror movie.
Yeah, and you know, we're talking about ambiguity in Kiss of the Vampire. There's a ton of ambiguity in this film. You know, Barbara Shelley did. You know, for most of the film, you assume she doesn't really know what's going on. She doesn't really know what's really inside of her. But then again, there's certain moments in the movie where it's you know, she kind of has this kind of like little smirk on her face, like she knows exactly what's going on, but they don't really, you know, it's never really explained where she comes from. You know, I think they say in the film she was like an orphan or she was like a refugee or something, and Peter Cushing's character, you know, brought her to his asylum or his medical practice, and you know, she's kind of like the nurse, but you don't really But this is a film you really can't explain too much because I think that would just totally ruin it. It's definitely a fairy tale type of film, and it is a tragic love story. And I know people who want to see, you know, an old-fashioned gothic horror film, they're probably turned off by that. But it's also one of the best overall acted films in the Hammer catalog, especially from Richard Pascoe and Barbara Shelley.
Yeah, I mean, especially, I mean, those two give terrific performances, and then the supporting cast is Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing.
And I think Terrence Fisher, I think he, you know, I've read interviews with him, I've read books about him. He was very much an old-fashioned type of guy. He wanted to make like an old-fashioned type of love story, and that's basically what he did. And I don't think maybe Hammer probably wanted that, but that, you know, that's what they got.
Let's talk briefly about the score for this movie.
Oh yes, James Bernard, and once again, you know, if you've seen enough Hammer films, even if you don't know the guy's name, you know who James Bernard is. His music has that certain type of sound, just like you know, the old Universal films had that certain type of music. The Edgar Allan Poe movies with Vincent Price had that certain type of music. You know, James Bernard was basically the sound of Hammer. But with the Gorgon, he had this very, you know, this almost ethereal type of, you know, this kind of chant in the background of the music. It's really weird, and it's very interesting. It's very distinctive. it's an excellent music score, but once again, it's not the type of music score you would usually associate with a Hammer monster movie. It doesn't have that driving type of quality to it.
No, he produced it with an instrument called the Nova chord.
Yeah.
Which is considered the world's first commercial polyphonic synthesizer. This is an electronic score for a 1964
horror film. I wonder. I wish Josh Kennedy was here. He knows every single facet of this film, but I'm surprised that Hammer would let him do that. I mean, maybe he explained to them, hey, this is a different type of film. It needs a different type of score, because it totally fits the film. It's like I said, it's distinctive, but it also has a very tragic quality to it as well. But it's not a blood and thunder type of score, basically.
No, the synthesizer here is a really bold and bizarre choice.
Yeah.
Not bizarre in the way that it feels like it came from outside the film. It really fits the movie, but there's nobody in 1964 that was pushing electronic scores.
Like
you said, to make that choice took some serious gumption.
Yeah, I mean, really, the whole film is just it's because this fits into the Hammer classic period. My definition of the Hammer classic period would probably start with Curse of Frankenstein. It would probably end like about maybe 1967, when they left Bray Studios, basically.
Right.
And I'm not saying that after that everything was bad, because we're actually going to talk about a movie that was made very late. They still made better films, but there's definitely a cutoff period from the Bray Studios period to everything after, and then because of the marketplace and everything, things started to go kind of downhill. But definitely the golden age of Hammer was, I'd say, from like 1957 to 1967. And the Gorgon isn't the golden age of Hammer, but it's very different from the types of films they were making around that time. And even the casting choices are very weird, because obviously you want to try to get Cushing and Lee in the movie, because they're Cushing and Lee. But Lee, he's wearing a Albert Einstein disguise. He's got this real, this real bushy mustache. He's got this real wild, toupee, this gray toupee. And, he's still Christopher Lee, I mean, you can't, there's no way you can disguise Christopher Lee. But, Christopher Lee was a very handsome man. As a matter of fact, I don't know how you feel about this. I think he could have played the Richard Pascoe role.
He could have. Yeah, I don't see a problem with that.
It's kind of surprising that they would put Lee in it's not surprising that he's in the film and that he's kind of like the Van Helsing type character, but it's kind of weird that they have him with a mustache and the wild hairdo. Here's Christopher Lee, and you're hiding him behind this. That's kind of that's kind of departure as well.
I want to let people discover that movie. I didn't want to talk too much about the plot because I don't think
you don't want to get into the actual appearance of the Gorgon.
I don't want to turn people off from the Gorgon, because that is the one thing about the movie that is.
Well, I think that kind of hurt how I felt about it when I first saw it. But once again, when you're dealing with these type of films, you have to put it. You have to put it within the context of the film, and I think a lot of
it's a tricky effect.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people that are say younger, and I'm not trying to pigeonhole anybody, because there's plenty of older people that don't like these type of films. You have to have the imagination and accept the film for what it is, and I think a lot of people who only watch modern movies, because they're so used to everything being explained to them or everything being shown on CGI, they just don't have the chances to use their imaginations,
Yeah, it's a totally different filmmaking language and a different pace, and it there may be a bit of a learning curve if you're used to watching modern horror and you go back to something like this.
Well, and that's the other thing about the Gorgon. It doesn't have a lot of shock, there's Cushing and Lee don't fight each other. There's not a lot of action. It is a very slow film, but like I said, like myself, it demands multiple viewings. I think it's one of those films that you appreciate it more if you see it more, and you place it within the context of what else was going on at Hammer at the time. It's a very original film, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it is indeed that, but it certainly has a special place in my heart, and I do hope people find this one. It is readily available. It's also on a Mill Creek double feature, and also available on
Indicator.
On the Indicator,
yeah. Yeah, but I will say this: if you don't want to, spend too much money on Indicator, and I can understand if you don't. The Mill Creek transfer looks fantastic.
No, it looks good.
I think out of all the Mill Creek Hammer Blu-rays, I think that one is the one that looks the best of all, is the Gorgon.
Next up on your list of recommendations is the 1966 Hammer zombie movie called Plague of the Zombies.
Plague of the Zombies.
Directed by John Gilling.
This coach is bound for a terrifying destination. Dead. But no corpse can remain at peace in this village of the undead, this land of the zombies. In this place, no one is safe. No one can hide from witchcraft, superstition, and fear. Even Sir James Forbes, the clear-headed man of science, was forced to accept the horrifying facts.
Young Martinus also says that he saw something on the moors, something that he insists was his brother. But we know that his brother is dead. We also know that he is not lying in his coffin. Someone in this village is practicing witchcraft. That corpse wandering on the moors is an undead, a zombie.
A place dominated by men without morals, whose bloodlusts are excited by hunting a human quarry. When Sylvia Forbes hated the young squire, it was dangerous. But when she fell in love with him, it was lethal.
That's a nice segue from the Gorgon, because
Written by John Gilling
wrote. Yeah, well, according to John Gilling, they totally changed the script of the Gorgon. I read in one interview he hated the Gorgon, but I think he wanted to direct the Gorgon. So I think that was probably what he was angry about. But Plague of the Zombies is, once again, there's no Cushing, there's no Lee, there's no brand name. I mean, well, you do have zombies, but back then, I mean, now, I was just, I've got the Blackhawks game on while I'm talking to you, and there's a commercial with two zombies falling in love. Now zombies are, that's the 21st century monster.
This is an important period for the zombie too, because up until 1968, with George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, the zombie was a Haitian voodoo ritual, a result of the Haitian voodoo ritual. It was not
the apocalyptic,
the creeping apocalyptic dreads of the dead rising from the grave. The zombie films were about who was the master controlling the zombies, not the actual...
and that plays into the whole British colonialism type of thing. But also, I was going to say, other than White Zombie, which was the Bela Lugosi movie way back in the 30s, I mean, zombies were almost and I Walk with a Zombie, Val Lewton, but I mean, especially in English cinema, they never really... I can't, off the top of my head, I can't really think of any other British films that, had zombies in them.
No, I mean, you're really talking about a very small cluster of films. They were not a regular monster appearance, and outside the three films we just mentioned, they're really, I can't off the top of my head, I can't think of any. I mean, there are others, but nothing that was a deal. There were no big zombie movies.
Yeah. And then this actually, I think this does qualify as a big zombie movie.
It does. It certainly does.
That's obviously it's low budget. You don't have 1,000 CGI zombies, and you don't have the Tom Savini makeup. But the makeup that they do have here is very effective. And for what little that they had to work with, Hammer. They only had like maybe 5 or 6 zombies, and I think I read somewhere what they would do is they would have one zombie shuffle off the screen, then they turn him around and they'd make him walk in the other end of the scene to make him look like there's more zombies than there was. But there's a very effective nightmare sequence where they literally do raise out of those very shallow graves that are always in Hammer films. For some reason, in a Hammer movie, they never put somebody 6 feet under. It was more like 2 feet under.
I was going to say 6 inches sometimes seems like
literally to make it easier to it's like, well, this guy's going to get out of here anyway, so we don't want to put him too deep. And if you're a Hammer fan, I mean that's kind of like that's one of the
it's a short runtime. We can't labor the point.
Yeah. It's just, that's one of the inside jokes of Hammer, they only put him in like a foot in there, but no, it's a very excellent sequence, and it anticipates a lot of what Romero and what the other later filmmakers would do. And a lot of people, they think, well, Hammer in the 1960s, they don't equate that with the zombie culture that we have today. But if you look at that nightmare sequence, it still holds up today.
The movie looks great. Again, we keep repeating this mantra, but the nighttime cinematography here is spectacular.
Yeah, and once again, there's no Cushing and Lee, but Andre Morell is basically, I guess you could say he's playing the Cushing role. He's a doctor, and one of his old students is a doctor in Cornwall, and he writes his mentor a letter saying there's all these mysterious deaths going on, I don't know what to do. So Andre Morell and his daughter, who's kind of nosy in a way, they come to this village in Cornwall. They don't get a very good reception. As in so many other Hammer films, the villagers, are suspicious because that's what they do in a Hammer movie. The villagers
that's their
don't
main
actually
motivation. The villagers don't want anybody else in.
Yeah, they don't actually work for a living. They just sit around the pub all day long.
Sharpening pitchforks is
exactly. So they come to this village and they find out that the young doctor who wrote Andre Morell, his wife is sick, and there's this mysterious aristocrat who has a lot of money. Nobody knows where he gets his money or how he gets it, and he lives on top of the old tin mine, and I don't want to say too much more than that. You can probably figure it out from there. But it has a lot of the, even though it isn't considered one of the brand name Hammer horrors, it has a lot of the elements. You have the suspicious villagers, you have the older doctor who sort of solves the mystery. You have the mysterious, the haughty, mysterious aristocrat who, it's very much a sort of Christopher Lee type role. If they had decided to put Christopher Lee in it, it's played by a English actor by the name of John Carson, who, if you close your eyes, you swear he sounds just like James Mason. and he's excellent, and Andre Morell is excellent, and it proves once again. And you know how much I love Cushing and Lee, but when a lot of people, Cushing and Lee isn't in this movie, this probably isn't as good. No, this is actually one of the better later Hammer films of the 1960s.
And I mean, as we said, it's one of the best zombie movies that's ever been made.
Yeah.
It's not a. I mean, it's a slow burn movie. I mean, we're not talking about any of the intense.
You're not going to see the zombies eat somebody's intestines, and you're not going to see heads get chopped off. It's not that type of zombie movie. And I know some people out there might say, oh well, that's how good can it be? Well, it actually is very good. It's set in the typical Hammer period of the late 1800s, early 1900s. I don't know exactly when. They're always vague on that, but it like you said, it looks great. It moves very fast. Jacqueline Pierce, who's the wife of the young doctor who comes to a tragic fate. Once again, like Jennifer Daniel, we're going to be talking about her in The Reptile, and she's very, very good. She has this very kind of unusual look to her. She's very attractive, but it's almost, she has this almost exotic quality, and that sort of plays into the exotic aspects of the zombie story in the film. And like I said, the nightmare sequence where the zombies rise from the typical Hammer graveyard is very well done, and I'm sure Romero and all these other guys that have been doing these zombie movies to death, they had to have seen it, because at that point, that was literally the only real mass zombie rising from the dead scene, I think, in all of cinema. I can't think of any others.
No, I can't either.
Yeah, and I don't think Plague of the Zombies gets enough credit for that, because everybody goes back to Night of the Living Dead, as they should, but, Plague of the Zombies was before Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, 2 years before, and it does get lost. Because, I think, of the proximity.
It does have its slow moments, but it moves very well. It's not one of those movies where you just, you want to turn it off and then come back 10 minutes later. It once you get into the story, it holds you. And we might as well mention Michael Ripper, because Michael Ripper is in Plague of the Zombies. He's I think he's a local constable. I think he's like the only constable this poor town has. And Michael Ripper, if you know anything about Hammer films, he's in almost like every Hammer movie. He actually did more Hammer movies, I think, than Cushing and Lee combined. I mean, he crops up in all these things. And he's just one of those great character actors that no matter what he does in any Hammer film, he just enlivens the movie.
And, I see the DNA of this movie, too. Even though you think of 1968 as the year that the zombie was completely reborn and everything after that is based on Romero. But, you can watch a movie like The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, which is a terrific... it's still a riff on Romero, but visually I see the DNA of Plague of the Zombies in something like that, which was made in... That's a Spanish film, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. There's so many movies that, and I don't want to get off too far off track here, but I was talking about how Hammer has become a brand name like Kleenex. There's so many other British horror movies that people just assume are Hammer films. Like Cushing and Lee made a ton of movies for Amicus, and we could really go off on that, but people automatically assume that if it's a British film, it is made in like the 50s, 60s, 70s, and it's set in like that Gothic period, it's automatically Hammer, when a lot of times it isn't. But that's just how much the Hammer name just carried over, and for a long time that's what so many other these companies were basically trying to do. They say in the later interviews, they'd ask some of these people, well, isn't this like a Hammer? Oh, we weren't like Hammer at all. Well, basically, that's why you were making this movie, because of the success of the Hammer films. But definitely they influenced, and they influenced a lot of people in America as well.
And I think I mentioned that Plague of the Zombies isn't available on Blu-ray in the States.
It will be.
Is it?
Shout Factory is coming out. What's really exciting about that is Plague of the Zombies. There's like a certain number of Hammer films that were made in like the mid '60s that, for whatever reason, I think they were co-produced with 20th Century Fox, and they kind of like got lost in that shuffle you talk about, that rights shuffle.
Rasputin and
yes.
The Witches and Plague of the Zombies.
And Anchor Bay, I'm sure you remember this, in the 90s, Anchor Bay put all these things out at first on VHS and widescreen.
Yeah.
And they put them out on DVD. And back then, this was like a huge, huge thing, because some of these movies had never been on home video. Some of these movies I had never even seen. These were the Hammer films that never got shown on TV. And,
I remember picking up that Plague of the Zombies VHS tape. Like that.
Yeah.
That was a big acquisition for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when all those came out, and I've still got most of the Anchor Bay DVDs. And what happened is a lot of them are out of print. And you go on eBay, and they're just asking for like ridiculous amounts of money for these things. But what I'm looking forward to is you look at the Anchor Bay DVDs now, and the visual quality is not very good. I mean, back then we thought it was great because we had never seen these films before, and we certainly had never seen them on widescreen. Now you look at the visual quality, and it's you know, not very good. And hopefully, Shout Factory, and you know, they've put out such incredible product. Hopefully, they come out with a new restoration or a, you know, a better looking version of Plague of the Zombies. And the rumors are that if they're going to do Plague of the Zombies, then there's other Hammer films in this group that they're probably going to come out with as well. I don't want to say too much, but I know someone who might be doing an extra on Plague of the Zombies. I can't even mention his name, and he kind of hinted that they're going to come out with some other Hammer stuff. So if you're a big Hammer fan, that's get ready to get your credit card blown up because yeah, Shout Factory is definitely going to do these things right. I mean, honestly, for what we have, the Hammer films that have been released on home video, I think, you know, there's a lot of great product out there.
Yeah, no, I think we're pretty lucky to have what we have.
Yeah,
and I'm excited that they're still working on them because there's such a long catalog to get through, and each of them has their own merits.
Yeah.
And now that brings us to the 1966 film from Hammer, also directed by John Gilling, called The Reptile.
In this remote little country village, the mortal remains of a man are laid to rest.
Who is it this time, Peter? It's Mr. Spaulding. They found him this morning. Just like the others.
Just like the others, he died in the night.
Get away from there! Get away!
Suddenly, violently, horribly.
This is an evil place. Corrupt and evil.
Evil, as venomous as a snake, turns the quiet of this village into a writhing hell on earth, where every man fears for his safety and his sanity, where everyone is suspect.
Do you mean they died by some sort of magic, some witchcraft?
For the first time in my life, I'm frightened.
Everyone is frightened. The doctor who'd lived his life in the East. This man who could be the next victim. This woman and this girl are frightened, hypnotized by the crawling, creeping spell of the reptile.
Stop! Pack your things, we're leaving.
No, Dr. Franklin. You are not leaving.
I could kill you.
Possibly. But you could never be free then, could you? And what would happen to little Anna then?
Trapped like animals in a cage and getting closer and closer, suffocating them with terror. The reptile.
Some people well, they should link it because basically it's almost like, I wouldn't say a remake, but almost kind of like the same film in a different way. They call them the Cornwall Classics because the Reptile is also set in Cornwall. And it has kind of like some elements of Kiss of the Vampire because Jennifer Daniel, who played the beautiful young wife in Kiss of the Vampire, she plays the beautiful young wife in the Reptile. It's almost like her character, like 4 years later, married another guy and she went through this other adventure. Because the gentleman who is her husband in this movie, I believe the actor's name is Ray Barrett. He looks a lot like Edward D'Souza. I mean, I'm surprised they didn't try to bring Edward D'Souza back for this movie. Maybe they did, and he was busy or something. But once again, they're a newlywed couple, and he's inherited this cottage from his late brother. His brother died of mysterious circumstances, and he decides to try to find out why his brother died the way he did. And, of course, the villagers are totally suspicious. They don't want to help him. And there's a mysterious aristocrat who lives in a big house. And he's played by Noel Willman, who was in Kiss of the Vampire. And he has a very interesting daughter by the name, who was played by Jacqueline Pierce. I believe her name is Anna. And we find out that the mysterious gentleman, whose name is Dr. Franklin, not Dr. Ravna, he was in India, and he was a missionary, and he got caught up in things he probably shouldn't have been caught up in, and his daughter is cursed to be, should I go ahead and say it, a snake woman?
I think maybe the title would have led some
Yeah,
viewers.
I know. Well, you never know. That's what cracks me up was like when these Hammer movies come out and they describe the plot on the back of the disc case, and they always act like nobody's going to know what it's about. I guess there may be a couple people out there that may not know, but that's just the way those companies do things. But yeah, okay, yeah, there's a snake woman in the movie,
and a snake cult too. Let's not shortchange it.
Yes. Yes, you don't. It's not as big as the vampire cult in Kiss of the Vampire, but it is kind of there. And
vampires are more popular than snakes.
Yes, exactly. Yes, and then snake women. But Jacqueline Pierce, she played the kind of doomed, tragic figure in Plague of the Zombies, and she kind of does the same thing in The Reptile. Because there is, the film is structured like a mystery, even though at the beginning of the film you kind of figure out exactly what's going on. But there's still a kind of mystery element to it, and you can also compare this film with a Gorgon, because obviously you have a female villain. But there's some ambiguity because Jacqueline Pierce she's not an evil character. She's been cursed. And, she also, along with Barbara Shelley's character in The Gorgon, you don't know exactly how much she kind of knows what's going on or what she's capable of. And actually, the young couple in The Reptile actually try to help her. They think that she's basically being abused by her father, that the guy is kind of a jerk, but then at the end of the film, you kind of realize why, he's such a jerk. He kind of explains, he has his little James Bond villain moment at the very end of the film where he kind of explains everything. But once again, what makes this film work, like Kiss of the Vampire, you have this married couple, and in a lot of these other classic horror films, the normal leading lady and leading man couple, they're always kind of duds. But here, once again, they're a realistic married couple. You totally believe that they do have this relationship. You like the characters, you worry about them. They're not just throwaway characters.
And I felt like this one feels more, I want to say, like a Sherlock Holmes sort of mystery.
Yeah.
It's a little bit modestly paced.
Yeah.
And it feels more about the mystery than the actual any act of horror that takes place. Which you have is, the sort of the disfigurement, the snake makeup that they have that can appear rather grotesque. But this is sort of outside the normal pacing and realm of Hammer.
Yeah, it's once again, it's not a blood and thunder, overly violent type of thriller. But I've always had like a certain amount of affection for this film. I think probably because of Jennifer Daniel. But no, it's an unusual type of monster. Like I said, you can't even really classify her as a monster. I know some people don't like the reptile makeup. They show too much of it, or it's not good enough. But if you're used to watching this type of film, this type of makeup doesn't bother me. The problem is that you have so many people, they're so used to, the CGI that we have nowadays, and they compare that to everything else, and, whoa, it just doesn't look realistic. Well, it's once again, it's a movie. You have to, accept it for what it is, and I think the makeup's really not that bad. I mean,
it looks better than the Gorgon, if I'm being honest. But...
Yeah. But I think also the fact that Jacqueline Pierce is, you feel sorry for her character.
Mm-hmm.
There's kind of some background that's set up. She's cursed basically because her dad was this missionary and he stuck his nose into something that he shouldn't have. And once again, you can equate that with the whole British colonial type of thing. And, they kind of, they don't explain too much of it, but you can kind of read between the lines that, this poor girl has had to spend her entire life being bossed around by her missionary father, and he basically, wound up cursing her, and she had no part in it. So that kind of gives a different spin on the typical monster character. If you just look at the advertising for the reptile, the trailer, you just think it's another monster movie. But it's once again it's a bit more complicated than the typical monster tale that you would think it would be.
It's got such a silly title too. The reptile. It's not going to sell itself to anyone who's looking at a list of Hammer movies and is like, I'm going to watch the reptile. I think that's number one on my list.
Yeah, but I think if you do watch it, you might be a bit surprised by it because it's not as outlandish as okay, you're dealing with a snake woman, but for a movie that deals with a snake woman, it's not as
No, exactly. I think it's moody. I think is the way you're supposed to approach it, and the title isn't going to lead you in that direction. It certainly sounds really silly, and I mean there's some silly elements to the film, but overall this is one of the more straight stories. If that's fair to say.
I think because of the whole aspect of the snake woman, you talk about the slower pace. I think they spent a lot more time developing the quote unquote normal characters, the married couple. They spent a lot of time, setting that up, and the guy's brother was killed by the reptile. I know I'm giving away the plot, but there's that kind of mystery there, and there's Michael Ripper. He almost plays kind of like the same character he did in Plague of the Zombies. He runs the bar this time. Any Hammer movie, Michael Ripper's going to wind up in the pub one way or the other. But he helps out the main character in the film try to get to the bottom of the mystery, and Noel Willman, who I've mentioned before, who's kind of the villain in Kiss of the Vampire. He's not really so much a villain. You kind of understand why he's going through what he's going through, but he's this very cold, austere type of person, and you automatically think he's behind everything, and then at the end you realize he's not really behind it at all. He's just trying to basically cover up things as best as he can.
Yeah, I think maybe the film doesn't sell itself, so that's our job is to make sure that interested parties find the movie that they need to see. Another one that I think needs help finding an audience is our next film in the final film on your list. Captain Chronos, Vampire Hunter, 1974, directed by Brian Clement.
In the 18th century in Central Europe, a black terror swept across the face of the land. The curse of vampirism, which had been a half-forgotten memory for hundreds of years, returned with a fury that struck unholy fear into the hearts of every man, woman, and child. One man dared to make a stand against this evil epidemic. One man dared to hurl a challenge of cold steel against the terror of the undead. He was Captain Chronos, Vampire Hunter.
It is commonly supposed that a vampire attacks in only one way, by biting the neck and draining the victim of blood. The girls you spoke of, they were not drained of blood, but of youth, of life itself. You see? He's been bitten on the mouth.
God's sake, I survived the vampire's bite.
He is not the man you are.
I'm doomed. My soul a never-ending torment.
Kill me! Kill me!
Her life will be yours. Yours. Her youth will pulse through your veins, my darling, replenishing, restoring. Take her.
At your service, sir.
To the death.
Yes, you bleed, my lord. This is God's blade. Forged for your black heart.
This is a film that I had not seen until just recently. It has been recommended to me on multiple occasions, and I kept waiting to get a Blu-ray. I wanted something to see.
Yeah.
I have resisted ordering the UK version, but I finally broke down and bought the digital copy on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something I don't tend to do, but I made an exception for Captain Chronos, and watched it over the last couple days. It is a phenomenal film.
I know. I'm not laughing at you. I love the fact. I love your reaction to it because it is.
It is not what I expected.
No, you hear that title, and you. When you hear,
honestly, I thought
when
it was like
made,
Space Vampires or something.
Yeah,
like, I had no idea what it was. Some very close friends of mine who I trust their opinions have told me that you need to watch Captain Chronos Vampire Heart, and I'm like, okay, I'll get to it. And because of this podcast, I finally, maybe that is the shame confession for this episode of Cinema Shame, is that I had not watched Captain Chronos.
Yeah, well, there's no shame in finally watching it and enjoying it. But when you hear the title and you find out it was made in the 70s by Hammer, you think, oh, this is one of those cheesy Hammers.
And it doesn't even have Ingrid Pitt in it. So why am I watching?
No, it does, but it has Caroline Munro in it.
That I didn't even know until I watched it today, and I'm like, holy hell!
And this is, and I basically know Caroline. I've met her on several occasions. I worked with her in House of the Gorgon, and she's absolute total sweetheart. She is like, you think of Caroline Munro as this larger than life presence because she was just absolutely gorgeous, and she was in all these incredible cult movies, and of course,
humanly gorgeous. I mean, you watch her on screen, and they shoot her in ways that makes her seem inhuman.
She's basically a special effect herself.
Right, absolutely.
But, I mean, when you meet her, she's like the sweetest, most normal I mean, she's not like anything. I realize I'm diverting away from the film, but she was telling a story on House of the Gorgon. We're sitting there during a lunch break, and she was talking about she does her laundry. She'll, like, walk down to the local laundromat in London, and she'll just like spend a whole day doing her laundry. And I'm thinking, I was just trying to get this picture in my head of Caroline Munro doing her laundry, and Martine Beswick was sitting there, and she's like shaking her head, like you actually spent a whole day doing your own laundry in a laundromat. I mean, it was one of those moments where like oh wow, it's like talk about behind the scenes. But no, that's she's just totally not this huge, larger-than-life, star crash, Stella Star type figure that you expect her to be. I mean, she's just. But anyway, yeah, she's in the film, and it's actually one of her best roles because I think.
Oh, they give her something to do in here. She's
exactly,
not
and
just
it's one of the few roles she's not dubbed.
Yeah.
I mean, she's dubbed in just about every movie, and she has this really very sweet English voice, But yeah, she is the damsel in distress. I know, some 21st century audiences, they don't like the whole, damsel in distress, woman needs to be rescued type character. But it's not, it's not something that.
But Horst Janssen is very pretty as well. I mean, he's kind of a damsel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think he was dubbed, but no, he
definitely had to be.
What?
I think he had to be dubbed, didn't he? I mean,
well, yeah. But anyway, get back to Captain Chronos. That was going to be or Brian Clemens was hoping it was going to be a recurring character. And Chronos, of course, means time. And basically, Brian Clemens, from what I've read, he had a plan to make a whole bunch of Captain Chronos films in different time periods. That basically Captain Chronos himself was an immortal, and he would go through all these different historical periods in each film, fighting, different types of vampires.
So influenced by Doctor Who, it seems like, in that regard. And this is a really different take on the Dracula Van Helsing.
Exactly, because I was going to say, in each film he was going to fight a different type of vampire, and within Captain Chronos, they explain at one point in the film there's all sorts of different vampires.
Right? Yeah, they make there's a speech early on in the film where he's talking about some of them are killed this way, and some of them are killed this way. So we're expanding this Dracula and vampire mythology beyond the scope of garlic cross.
Yeah, and I thought that was brilliant, because that way you could basically play with the conventions any way you want to. I mean, you could. The field is wide open now.
Right. When they went through this, I'm like, holy shit, they just took this up a notch.
Exactly.
Like, anything is possible in this particular universe in terms of the supernatural effect of vampires. I mean, the unlimited potential for this film, and as you're saying, this series, which has made me really sad all of a sudden, knowing that I didn't get 12 Captain Chronos vampire hunter movies.
Well, I'm surprised somebody hasn't tried to remake it. I mean, every so often there's these rumors. Oh yeah, they're gonna do in their Captain Chronos, and they're gonna do it this way. And I'm almost afraid of what modern day Hollywood would do with Captain Chronos. I could, do you want The Rock playing Captain Chronos, or
I don't really want to know what they. I mean, I want this in the 70s. I don't know that this.
Yeah,
can
definitely.
Be done.
I think if you tried to do it now, it would look totally contrived. And they would do it as kind of a spoof, and that's the one thing about Hammer overall, not just in Captain Chronos. When the films do have this type of humor, but it's not overtly humorous, and it's not wink wink nudge nudge. You have to kind of catch it. And of course, Brian Clemens, he did all that work on the Avengers TV series, which is, I think, one of the greatest TV series ever made, and it had that kind of real quirky English humor that there's so much that it's not totally the humor isn't totally obvious. It's not American type humor is basically what I'm trying to say. It's very sly,
understated.
Yes, it has that very dry wit. And Captain Chronos has a lot of humor, but it's not like, oh, the movie's a joke.
No, it never stops for a punchline, I think is what we're trying to get at.
Yes, exactly.
It's all very situational, and like all the great British comedies never pause for the laugh.
Exactly.
When the joke drops and you finally get it, they're already telling another one. And in this instance, we're not telling another joke, we're moving on. We're moving on with the plot. We're moving on with
exactly. It's within the context of the story. It's not. We're telling this joke, which is going to stop the story and just totally take you out of the mood. The humor just like totally fits the mood of the film, and I just love the way this film was put together. And I don't know if during your research you found this out, but Michael Carreras, who was the son of James Carreras, who was running Hammer at this time, he did not like this movie. He thought it was ridiculous, which probably explains why Hammer died off pretty soon after this, because I don't think this film got much distribution anywhere. It was one of those, a lot of Hammer films in the 70s, this is what really hurt Hammer, is they weren't getting the distribution deals they used to in the 50s and the 60s, where American studios, major American studios, would show their films. A lot of their films, just didn't get shown anywhere.
Yeah, I don't even have a release date for a U.S. release here. I think the UK, but it says it was distributed by Paramount.
Yeah, I think the film was made in actually 1972, and I don't think it actually came out anywhere until like 2 years later. I honestly think Hammer didn't even know what to do with it, or they didn't know how to sell it. And it is a hard movie. I mean, if you try.
You can't describe it, first of all.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think you could really do this justice.
Yeah.
with a synopsis.
I mean, basically, Captain Chronos, he's a superhero. I mean,
It really does feel like a comic book story. Like, it feels like a comic book, well, it doesn't even feel like an origin story because it's not labored. It feels like the third entry in a much larger series.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I hate about origin stories, because if you already know the origin, you're just sitting there like, okay, let's get on with it. And, of course, on an origin story, they always change everything, which if you're, a real geek, that's going to drive you crazy anyways. But that's what I love about Captain Chronos. And once again, we talk about how a different style of filmmaking. You didn't really have origin stories back in those days. When they made a movie about a character, at the beginning of the film, the character's already formed. He's there, and he's already doing his thing. They didn't waste an hour explaining to you, why the character does what he does. He's just there. And once again, you go back to ambiguity. There's no explanation of Chronos. They give little hints here and there. I think his family was wiped out by vampires. He came back from one of the Napoleonic battles or something. But there's still a lot of, you don't really know why this guy is doing what he's doing. And he has his own logo, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
It
seems like, they are taking, I mean, I made a crack about it feeling like Captain Chronos Space Vampire Hunter or something like that, but it does sort of seem like they're taking cues from the sci-fi, the early 70s sci-fi that had grown in popularity. Like, we're talking about the pre-Star Wars sci-fi, which was kitschy and funny, and there's a certain pacing to it that was beholden strictly to that kind of era of science fiction, and I felt that in here.
And like I said, the whole like the Avengers, TV show, which Brian Clemens had a big hand in, it has that type of adventure humor type of thing where, like I said, the humor isn't so totally out of whack. You still have the adventure, but it's kind of like a safe adventure. This is a film about vampires, but I think there's only like one drop of blood in the entire film. It's very stylishly done as well. And what's really sad is, Brian Clemens, he should have been running Hammer. This is a guy that should have been running Hammer.
I feel like based on this film, he understood where the decade was going, and Hammer was sort of out of sync. I mean, they had made strides. The Karnstein, the trilogy. They're entertaining films, except with you could argue the middle one there.
Lust for a Vampire.
Is not good.
But that's where people get the whole cheese, the cheesy Hammer, because that's what the lesbian vampires. That's where people equate Hammer with the cheese factor.
And those are entertaining films, but they're not of the same quality as what they had done earlier, and in their attempt to keep with the times and the more exploitative horror that was coming up, they never really got their footing again, and this felt like something new. And I'm saying that obviously looking back on my experience with mid-70s horror and something like Fearless Vampire Hunter, Polanski's film had that same kind of humor tucked into it, and that was a take on Hammer as well. So but similar vein, but it's going in that direction, and this is the movie that was like, they get it, and then, oops, we're done, and that's a shame. What I'm seeing here is I need 10 years of this, and it just abruptly ends.
Like I said, because there's a lot of Hammer fans who defend Michael Carreras and the poor guy, he had all these plans and he just didn't have the money, and the British film industry was against him, and I'm like, well, okay, but I mean, he owned the company, so in the end, you still have to
you're in charge of finding the talent. If you don't get it, Like, you need to find somebody who does, and
the buck
that's
stops
the business.
here, and then the fact that he didn't like this film, and the fact that it took them so long to even get it distributed, and maybe that wasn't their fault, maybe just other people didn't understand it. Maybe it was made at the wrong time, but still, this was something that they definitely should have really, put more energy into selling or doing something with, because it's a great idea. And like you said, when you take the whole vampire myth and you take the legends and you deconstruct that, and you basically set yourself up to where in other vampire movies with this character you could basically do whatever you wanted and just totally turn it on its head.
You said, they did the hard part in this movie.
Yeah.
They did the hard part of setting up the universe, which is totally other. We said it in the past, given you the opportunity for, like you say, time travel. I mean, literally anything could have happened coming out of this film.
Yeah.
And that's a
damn
hard thing to accomplish, and make it, and then produce an entertaining supernatural swashbuckler.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then just imagine if somebody had come along and made a sequel and given them more money to work with, and you could have. And people say, well, swashbucklers at that time, but wasn't that the time when Richard Lester's Three Musketeers movies came out? I mean, that's really almost kind of like the same thing in a way.
It is, and what we were experiencing in the 70s, the genres kind of exploded too. I mean, there was no clear.
Well,
they were merging and doing all sorts of creative things with the way that they were presented.
Well, the other thing about, we talk about Hammer falling off, what really hurt them, and it hurt all the other, like American International and all the Amicus and all these other companies, is that, you had The Exorcist and Jaws and The Omen. You had the big studios making basically these low-budget genre movies, but now, of course Star Wars came along, and that just basically blew everybody out of the water. So that type
shift.
Of filmmaking, that type of filmmaking, when the big studios are basically making your product, there's no way they could have competed.
Yeah, it was the big shift when they lifted the production code and you initiated the rating system.
Yes,
and now the big studios wanted to make a name for themselves in this more exploitative material, and horror was the natural step here. So you have these large productions of The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby, and horror became big business, whereas up until that point you left it to the little guys to fight with the rating system and navigate those problems on a much smaller budget. And that really was the complete shift in the film industry at this point.
Yeah, and Hammer at that time, like I said, when it came to ideas, they were just I mean, I love Dracula AD 1972, but the whole Dracula in the modern era, that really didn't work out too well.
That rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. I mean, from our perspective, it seems silly to make that be a stumbling point for your Dracula movie, because now it's commonplace, vampires in a modern setting. But that was a radical idea, just as making a supernatural swashbuckler vampire Time Lord thing here is. I mean, it's in the same way that Hammer is struggling to find relevance in the 70s.
Yeah. But like I said, they weren't getting their films distributed the way they used to be, and that's what really hurt them, because I don't think people realize, I don't even think Hammer fans realize how much overseas money went into making those films, and I think they took that for granted, and once that went away, they just didn't know what to do anymore. And the other thing is, Hammer all along, they didn't just make monster movies. In their golden age, they made war films, they made pirate movies, they made science fiction movies, the thrillers. And in the 70s, they were just here's vampires again. One of the things that Hammer fans debate, and one of the many things Hammer bands debate. Well, what if Hammer had just stayed around? And honestly, I don't think they would have stayed around, because, like I said, you had all these, major big budget horror and science fiction movies being made. There's just no way they were going to, and the whole British film industry, I think, just fell apart at that point as well. I don't think, the only thing that would have helped Hammer if somebody came along, or some multimillionaire, and just bought it and just poured all this money into it. I think they were kind of doomed no matter what.
And that would have changed Hammer films probably anyway. I mean, I'm not sure that that's a positive thing, because part of what they were so good at was finding creative solutions within that budget. And sometimes those limitations are responsible for the
exactly
makes
people more creative.
Right.
And Christopher Lee didn't want to make those type of movies anymore, and Peter Cushing was getting older, and it was just a number. Everybody just goes on and on about, if Hammer had been around. But I mean, the things are always going to change. You can't. It's like the James Bond movies. Everybody wants James Bond to be like the James Bond when they were kids, when they were enjoying it, and it's if you do that, you're basically remaking the same thing over and over and over again, and that you're not going to progress. That's not going to make things any better either. So, considering the budgets that they didn't have, considering all the constraints they were up against, and like I said, you look at today, and anything that gets released on Blu-ray, any book that gets written about the company. I mean, you and I are talking about Hammer right now. We spent like about 2 hours talking about it. For what they have done, I think the mark that they've left is pretty incredible. I mean, you look at major studio films, mainstream films from the 50s, 60s, and 70s that have never even seen these films. They've left no mark, and you look at the mark Hammer has left. It's actually pretty amazing, I think.
It's true. I mean, we've talked about the many ways that these movies endure and remain relevant to modern audiences, and I think there's a lot of people who still haven't given them enough consideration, and I hope that there's some people out there listening to this that's like, maybe I can check out some of these movies and see what all this fuss is about. I mean, these two guys are talking about it jibber jabber all this night, so I mean, there's got to be something going on.
I mean, today where pop culture is ruled by geek culture, and one of the biggest foundations of geek culture is Star Wars. And Star Wars, the original Star Wars, had Peter Cushing in it. And, Christopher Lee was in the prequels, and, Christopher Lee was in Lord of the Rings. So they still have that impact on geek culture. Why did George Lucas cast Peter Cushing in Star Wars? Because he watched, all those Hammer movies, when he was a kid. So it's that it carries on to today.
All right, I think we did it good. I think
okay.
we covered our movies, and we talked about some others in between, and I don't. Did you have anything else you'd like to add? Is there any parting words?
Parting words. Well, I hope I didn't put anybody to sleep.
That's what editing's for. If it gets slow, I can just chop it up a little bit.
Yeah. I guess if there are any Hammer fans out there, I'm going to put in a plug. Keep an eye out for House of the Gorgon, directed, written, produced by Joshua Kennedy, and starring Veronica Carlson, Caroline Munro, Martine Beswick, and Christopher Neame. So the Hammer people are still around, and they're still working, so they're still out there.
All right. That seems like a good thing to look forward to. I know I will check it out when I have the opportunity. Thank you very much for coming on. This was fantastic, and
thank you. It's an honor to be invited on here. So.
No, this is great. I'm glad I could get. I know Will was playing matchmaker here, but it was a fantastic idea. And that concludes our broadcast day. In the show notes, I'll link to all the Hammer Blu-ray, DVD, and streaming releases we've mentioned in this episode. Clicking those links helps fuel the Sin and Shame podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave us a review, share us on your preferred social media platform, or maybe even place your phone in front of a real live human and say, "Listen to this!" exclamation point. Over on the Cinema Shame website, we're wrapping up our month of horror reviewing. Share your blog posts and all your first-time watches with us. In November, we're encouraging you to crack open those unwatched Criterions and embrace the final month of Filmstruck as the service becomes multimedia conglomerate roadkill at the end of November. This will also coincide with the Barnes & Noble Criterion sale throughout the month of November. Share your first-time watches with us by tagging Cinema Shame on Twitter and Facebook, and as always, we'll share a roundup of your blog entries at the end of the month. On the next few episodes of the Cinema Shame podcast, we'll revisit the musical genre, dabble in some more Hitchcock, and hopefully embrace the Christmas spirit. My name is James Patrick, at 007 Hertz Rumble on the Twitter. Until next month, embrace your shame. Only the penitent movie watcher will pass.
You have chosen